So we finally have an answer for who will be starting in the All-Star game this year, and some of these picks, specifically one, has been pretty controversial. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you have not yet, check out my most recent main channel upload called Has Offense Gone Too Far in the NBA? Title kind of explains what the discussion is. It is a long form discussion about offense and what the future of it is, its history and all that. So I'd appreciate it if you checked it out. If you haven't yet, it will be the top link in the description. I'm trying to get ahead of my words and talking too fast. Today we're going to talk about the All-Star stuff, the starters, what I think of that list. I'm also going to give my personal All-Star reserves, talk a little bit about some of my issues with All-Star voting, and then finally, even though this video is very much themed on All-Star stuff, I do also want to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers, because even though they just lost their most recent game, they have been on a good win streak lately and overall have improved their standing in the NBA. So with that said, our Eastern Conference starters are Giannis Antetokounmpo, Joel Embiid, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton, and Damian Lillard. Now, when I say that there is one standout controversial guy, it is definitely Dame, just because this is definitely the worst season he has had in quite a while, and weirdly now is the time when he is getting his first All-Star start. It kind of reminds me of like Leonardo DiCaprio winning his Oscar for The Revenant. It's like, really? This year? This is the one? Seems like you're making up for something here. But yeah, Dame, I wouldn't have started him. I personally would have started Jalen Brunson. Spoiler alert to one of my reserves, as if it wasn't obvious. Jalen has been awesome this year. I think he's been better than Dame, and I think the Knicks have been so good, especially lately, that they're kind of deserving of the representation of a starter if they actually have a starting caliber guy, and they indeed do. I don't necessarily like the argument of like, this team is good, therefore they deserve all-star representation, because if a player on their team isn't playing at an all-star level, then no, they don't. I don't think you should just arbitrarily give teams an all-star quota and one player has to fit it, you know, in case that player truly is not playing like an all-star. Sometimes teams are good, sometimes teams are competent, and they do it without having an all-star tier guy. But regardless of that whole thing, yeah, Jalen Brunson should be starting over Damian Lillard. That said, Damian definitely should be an all-star. I've seen people pushing it a little far and suggesting otherwise. He definitely belongs among the Eastern All-Stars. He probably would have been a reserve for me though, because there are really 3 guards in the East who I all think probably have a better claim to the title of starter. This seems like a seniority type of thing. You know, Dame has the history in the All-Star game. I believe this is his 8th All-Star appearance. And Jalen, I believe this is his 2nd. Tyrese Maxey, this is his 1st. Trae Young, if he were to make it. You know, I don't know. I know he had the 1 year he started. I can't remember the rest of it. Anyways, so Damian Lillard, yeah, I don't think that he should have been the starter, but it is what it is. After that, Tyrese Halliburton is a fairly obvious one. He's probably been one of the most standout players this season, at least by contrast to what the expectations were. He was very good last year, but this year, Pacers have put a better roster around him, and he's managed to elevate his game beyond the already very high bar that he set in his previous season. Being able to average like 23 and 12 on like 2 turnovers on well above league average efficiency, one of the best shooters in the NBA. I believe if he's not there, he's in the ballpark of 50, 40, 90. 49.6% from the field, 40% from 3, 86.2% from the line. 86 is pretty far away from 90, I guess. In that ballpark is ultimately my point. Yeah, 23 and 12. Jesus, man, that's crazy. 8 3-pointers a game on 40% with that crazy-ass form, 63% true shooting, 5% above league average. Yeah, there's no doubt Tyrese is a very, very deserving all-star this year. Jason Tatum, best player on the best team in the East and the best team in the NBA, period. Putting up his typical really solid, really good, I shouldn't say solid, like saying relative to his own expectation, I guess, I don't know. His numbers are good, as they always are, and he's, as I like to mention very regularly, a very underrated defender. Joel Embiid and Giannis, what do you even say? Joel Embiid's averaging the most points per minute in NBA history. Giannis is Giannis. Frankly, I mean, I believe fan voting is the factor here, so it's more about popularity. So at the end of the day, I'm not too upset about it. But honestly, I think Joel Embiid deserves to be the captain this year. He's definitely been the best player in the Eastern Conference. Moving on to the West, I think they nailed this starting lineup, which might be a little bit controversial because there's a lot of people upset that, you know, speaking of Dame starting, that this is the first year with a healthy Stephen Curry available where he is not going to be an all-star starter. Now, the thing about that is the players that have been placed over him have been better than him, and their teams have been better than the Warriors. And I say that with Stephen Curry being my second favorite player of all time, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic have both been playing better. Luka, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain why he's been better. In the case of SGA, I don't know, maybe his counting stats are pretty comparable to Steph, but the team's just so much better. He's also really clutch, and I don't know. I don't know how to describe why they're so much better, but they've definitely been better. And again, the record thing, I don't necessarily love the influence of winning on who is the all-star, because sometimes a player can be an all-star in a bad situation and that's outside of their control. However, in a case like this with SGA and Luka both playing at superstar level, Steph still playing at a superstar level, but not quite on their tier while having a worse record, yeah, I'm gonna go with Luka and Shai personally as the resident Stephen Curry stan. After that, Nikola Jokic is fairly obvious. LeBron's the captain again. I feel like there will definitely be players on the bench that are better than LeBron. Kawhi Leonard would just be an example. Anthony Davis, a player on his own team. Either way, I'm not going to complain about LeBron starting the All-Star game. I also believe this is his 20th All-Star game, so that's awesome. And Kevin Durant, I believe this is like his 14th. It's gonna be cool seeing them play together. I do like that aspect of this. Overall, I think the West All-Stars are perfect. I think they got that right. I think the East, it should have been Jalen Brunson instead of Dame. But in general, that's, one player off isn't that big of a deal. And I also say this all the time, who actually starts the All-Star game is something that we really don't pay attention to over time. Like, it's something that we focus on now, and I make a video about it now. But like, we're not going to be talking about who the all-star starters were this year, next year. No one really gives a shit. It's not like you get a different star next to your name on Basketball Reference. It's like the same accolade is applied. They're not a separate accolade. It just reads as all-star. So, what difference does it really make? Maybe you could view it as like a respect thing, but whatever. I don't get too bent out of shape about it, and I don't think you should either, even if you feel like your favorite player got snubbed or whatever. With that said, speaking of players getting snubbed, it's going to happen a lot here because, as I'm going to talk about later in the video, all-star voting, or really the amount of roster spots that exist, is kind of criminal in the context of the modern NBA. But that said, I think I'm just going to do bench by bench. I'm not going to go through back and forth by positions. My bench unit guards are in the Eastern Conference. It's going to be Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell. Jalen, as I mentioned, should have been starting, so this is just best thing you can do is just give him that reserve spot as he deserves. Donovan Mitchell is Donovan Mitchell, and he's been on a really good streak lately, as have the Cavaliers. We're going to talk more about that in a second. And I think he's probably just been, the, I guess, fourth best guard in the Eastern Conference this year, so it only makes sense he'd go there. I got Bam Adebayo in here for a forward, and I do have to go ahead and spoil that one of my snubs is going to be Jimmy Butler. Jimmy's counting stats are just a little less impressive, and Bam, I think, is having the best season of his career individually on really both ends of the floor, and for that reason, I felt like he would be better to represent the Heat than Jimmy. Maybe that's crazy, because Jimmy normally is the better player, but I feel like if you're asking me who's had the better regular season, the answer is Bam. So Miami's getting some representation with Bam, but I'm not giving them Bam and Jimmy as they have had the past couple of years, I believe. Kristaps Porzingis of the Boston Celtics. I guess I have to spoil another snub here. I also picked Porzingis over Jaylen Brown. I do realize why that would be controversial as well, but as I have said on this channel a couple of times now, every time I watch the Celtics, it feels like Porzingis is just more important to their success. Not just in terms of their individual performances in that game, but also in the way that Porzingis is utilized. And some of that's a little bit unfair to Jalen, just because it's like the offensive hub shooting big man role being as impactful as it is isn't really relevant or something that he can contribute to. So it's like you're knocking him for something that's outside of his control. But either way, still stands true that for me, Porzingis foundationally to Boston's offense and Porzingis in terms of his performance matters more to the success of the Celtics than Jaylen Brown does. Therefore, I'm pretty much always going to perceive you to be the better player at that point. So I got to give it to Porzingis. That said, he did get an ankle injury in the Heat game last night, so maybe he's going to end up missing it depending on what the timetable of the recovery of that is. So maybe that's how Jaylen Brown gets through. I hope people aren't too mad at that one, but like Porzingis has just been so fucking good for Boston. He's also more important to their defense. I haven't even mentioned that aspect of it. Last forward, as much as he's a player that I don't enjoy watching typically, although I have enjoyed his game of late because of recent changes, Julius Randle having an all-star season. I know most of the discourse around Julius Randle, especially in the NBA Twitter world, is more making fun of him than actually acknowledging how good of a basketball player he is. And he definitely has faults that are worthy of intense and regularly discussed criticism. But he's still a positive player. He's still borderline all-NBA performer. He has been before. His numbers are good. He is shooting terribly from three. But he's also shooting a little bit less threes. Probably should dial it back even more, but either way, been more efficient, more two-pointers, less threes, as I mentioned. And I feel like his role offensively, there's less forcing shots now that OG is there. There's still plenty of forcing shots, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, he's an all-star. But that is my bench unit, and then my wild cards. So the last two guys, it's going to be Tyrese Maxey and Trae Young. Tyrese Maxey's averaging like 26 points per game on one of the top 4 seeds in the conference, and Trae is putting up great numbers on a bad Hawks team, but ultimately still putting up great numbers. And I realize that Trae is not necessarily one of the most popular players in the league, or at the very least, it's pretty popular to hate on the guy, but he's very good. I don't know what else to tell you. He just is. So my main snubs after all of that is Jimmy Butler, Paolo Banchero, who was a big vote getter, and Jaylen Brown. Jimmy's numbers this year just don't blow me away. Neither did Jaylen's. And Paolo, the only reason I gave Julius the spot over Paolo was, ironically, a mild efficiency difference. Julius Randle was right around league average for shooting, Paolo about 5% below. So I just figured it's an interesting one. I realized there could be some people who'd prefer Paolo in there. He's definitely had a much better second year than his first. His efficiency is much improved. He's shooting a respectable percentage from the field and from three, but he's still not overall the most efficient scorer in the world. And again, like I mentioned, I don't really believe in the concept of a team deserving an all-star. And though Orlando has been slipping lately, they have been a surprisingly not bad team this year, and Paolo has played a big part in that, but I don't know that they, and don't even believe in the concept of deserving an all-star. Pretty much think that all of the guys who are snubbed, because there's a lot more in the West, I'll show you in a second, it's a product of a problem with the All-Star game. But moving on to the West, my bench is obviously going to include Steph Curry. Don't think that needs to be explained. Anthony Edwards, probably the best player on the, is it OKC or them who's the first seed right now? I haven't looked in like 2 days, and I know it's like neck and neck. Best team in the Western Conference by the factor of 1 win. But either way, he's the best player on that team, best offensive player for sure, and I figured he would make for a good all-star. I will also just, I guess none of these snubs are being revealed later. I'm just going to reveal them as I go along. Rudy Gobert is not going to make it. You'll see why with this list later on, but yeah, so Ant is representing the Timberwolves. Kawhi Leonard, good this year. Not only good this year, but like playing this year. Like hasn't really missed any significant time. Paul George putting alongside him, another really good Paul George year. Sometimes with these guys, I don't know what to say other than like, yeah, these guys are exactly who you know them to be, and that's why they're here. Anthony Davis is the last one. As I mentioned, he's the best player on the Lakers, so realistically, if we're just going on who the better player is, he should be starting over LeBron, but LeBron is also LeBron, and you can't factor that out, so it makes sense that he's an all-star, and I don't really care. Yeah, AD definitely needs to be on this bench. It'd be criminal otherwise. And then my final 2 wild card players going to be De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker. Honestly, you could argue that De'Aaron deserves to be not the wild card and it should be Ant, but also it feels criminal not to have Ant in the initial reserves. Also, it doesn't really matter. It's who's on the bench, so I'm getting hung up over nothing. But like either way, I'm not necessarily saying Ant has played better than De'Aaron, because De'Aaron has been really good this year, and the big thing with him is that, you know, it didn't seem like De'Aaron was ever going to be a good three-point shooter in the NBA. He's progressed to the point where he's been solid. Actually, solid's probably not even accurate, because there's about 31-32% the last couple of seasons. However, This year, he's at 39% from 3 on 8 attempts per game. That's fantastic. And he's at 27 points per game as a result of that boost to his offense. Just being that 3-level scorer, he was already a deadly slasher and mid-range shooter. But now that he's got that 3 ball, his offensive potential is a lot higher than it previously was. And he definitely deserves to be an all-star this year. And Devin Booker got a comically low amount of votes. However, he is still good and he especially started the season being super hot. Yeah, it seems like Devin Booker is not that popular, but at the end of the day, good basketball player is a good basketball player. So as for our snubs, we've got a long list. Rudy Gobert, as I previously mentioned. Domantas Sabonis is having the best season of his career. He's averaging 20, 13, and 8 on 60+% shooting from the field. That's awesome. Alperen Sengun has had the best season of his career, and he's been the best player on the Rockets, who have been a respectable team this year. The Pelicans are an example of a team that's like kind of hard to pick one because they're actually a higher seeded team in the West at this point. However, you can't really pick an individual all-star for them because I feel like Brandon nor Zion's numbers are super impressive, nor have either of them had super standout years. Zion's had kind of a disappointing year, if anything. CJ McCollum's been excellent for them. He's shooting insanely well across the board this year. He's at 47% from 3. But like individually, I feel like none of them are all-stars, but like collectively they've been a good team. So at least shout out to them for that. Larry Markkinen, no. Kyrie Irving didn't make it. Rudy made sure to mention to make sure that I mentioned that Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. are both playing like all-stars, but the Grizzlies suck. So that's true. Desmond Bane's averaging like 25, 5, and 5 on decent splits. All of these names, I think a lot of them are shorted simply because 12 roster spots is pretty ridiculous for all-star teams, given the modern context of the NBA. Not only is the league more talented than ever, literally there are more roster spots for normal NBA rosters, so it logistically just makes sense that there would be 15 spots, and thus we can get 3 more all-stars on each side of things. We don't have to worry about people freaking out about snubs every year. And more importantly, there's just adequate representation of who the best players in the league are, all while also that stuff like affects contracts and shit as well. So like, I think it's important to accurately represent your talent pool. And like this long list of players not being all-stars, all of them being healthy, that's like, you're just leaving something short. And like, even if you disagree with me about some of my snubs, like maybe some guys who I put in here you wouldn't, and you would put those snubs in instead, regardless of how you feel about my personal decisions here, that would mean that those players are snubbed. And either way, like if Tyrese Maxey and Trae Young were snubbed and Jimmy and Paolo made it, well then, there's still 2 major snubs right there. I really do feel like we need to expand the all-star rosters to 15. I do like that this year they're not doing the draft format anymore. That shit got tired real fast. All-star stuff. Moving on to the Cavaliers, that all-star shit lasted longer than I thought it would, so I'm not going to dwell on this for too long. But the Cavaliers, I believe it was a 9-game win streak they recently went on. I am getting on this a little bit late, so unfortunately their most recent game was a loss to the Milwaukee Bucks. But they have been without Darius Garland as well as without Evan Mobley. And, as disappointing as Evan has been offensively throughout his career, he's still a very big staple of their defense. And in spite of that, they have remained one of the top defenses in the NBA. Donovan Mitchell is averaging 27 and 7, really picking up the assist playmaking role from Darius Garland because of his absence. And not only this recent 8-game win streak, but if you go all the way back to their 25th game of the season, in their last 13, they have lost just 3 games. Or in their last 14, they've lost 4 games, I guess, if you're counting this Bucks one, but that's not as fun. What I will say, just to not get hopes too high, but something to factor in here. Again, factor in that Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley have not been playing. But they did beat the Wizards twice, the Spurs, the Nets, the Bulls, the Hawks, and the recently not doing very good Orlando Magic, and they did get stomped by the Bucks, though to be fair, they also stomped the Bucks big time in their 40-point win against them just about 9 days ago. Very, very big game for them. There was no Giannis or Brook though, so no, there is a Brook. Yeah, sorry, there is no Giannis. I didn't even realize that. So now that I'm looking at it, yeah, this win streak's not all that super impressive. However, they have turned their tides and turned their standings in the league. And again, they are still doing this while injured, so it's not like their team isn't missing players too. And they have been doing it with fairly impressive margins of victory. Plus 27 on Orlando, plus 21 on Atlanta, plus 18 on Chicago, plus 24 on Washington, plus 39 on Washington, and also plus 18 on the Bulls. So they have still managed to look like quite a better team with missing major pieces. Darius Garland's been disappointing this year, but he's still a good player, just like with Evan Mobley. So one player, when I was watching back highlights for this team, just to get an idea of how they've been during this streak, one player really stood out to me. Sam Merrill, or Merrill, I don't know which one it is. It might be Sam Merrill, and whatever. Either way, he has been lights out for them. He's at like 43% from three. Honestly, it seems like Max Strus is going to get Max Strused, which is him taking Duncan Robinson's spot, got that job on the Cavaliers and all that money, gets paid all that money, goes to the team, has a bigger role, and then another shooter off of the bench who they hired for nothing comes in and is just better than him off of the bench, because he's shooting like 10% better from three this year than the guy that they just paid $15 million to be a three-point shooter. I do think Max probably has a more capable all-around game, better at attacking closeouts and things like that, making good passes, playing decent defense, but in terms of the thing that he was mainly paid for, he's getting outclassed by a guy who wasn't really an NBA player before, so I just think it's kind of funny that history is repeating itself there. Because of this recent win streak, the Cavaliers have now captured the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, so I think they basically have just caught up to where they were supposed to be. They started this year really disappointing. You would have thought the injuries would have tanked their season, but if anything, it has seemed to swing things in a positive direction. I hope that doesn't mean anything too deep and that when those guys come back, they can still be good. It has been a very weird season for them, but the fact that they're coming out looking really good lately, definitely something to be a little bit excited about if you're a Cavaliers fan. That is it for me. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. The link to his podcast will be the second link in the description. The first link, again, I blanked on the title of the fucking video. Oh, fuck it. Just fuck it. You go watch the video or don't. Goodbye.